What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, here at the end of the week prior to Super Bowl week, where we're going to get all the quotes and media attention right starting next week when both teams go down to New Orleans and we get the whole show started on Monday. But for right now on today's show, we got a couple stories to get to on today's agenda, starting with looking at the situation in Cincinnati with their two star wide receivers, T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase. Both of them are inching towards a new contract, more so T. Higgins than Ja'Marr Chase. But what's the difficulty and the level of attainment that the Bengals can have in actually doing that? Their general manager had something to say about it, so we're going to react to it on today's show. And also, speaking of general managers in New York, one of our favorites, JioSaavn, also talked about some more on their draft plan, what his expectations are with the number 3 overall pick, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that as to what kind of options they have at number 3, not just in the draft, but in the entire offseason. That and more coming up on today's show. And before we get started, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make on today's show, don't hesitate to do so. Any opinion, comment, or just anything you'd like to say on these live shows is very much appreciated, and we invite it to get your guys' sense of what we're talking about and just a different perspective that we can incorporate into these conversations. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message gets seen and stands out and gets featured on today's show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. You can use the Super Chat feature by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way just to support our show. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button and let us keep bringing you the sports content you love, and also getting involved with it always makes it a lot more fun. So again, hit the Super Chat button and let us know what's on your mind. So with that now out of the way, we can start with our first topic, talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. And yeah, I mean, a familiar topic, right? Because last offseason was filled with a lot of wide receiver news, right? We had the Brandon Ayuk stuff going on, T. Higgins as well for a little bit, A.J. Brown getting extended, Justin Jefferson getting a new contract, CeeDee Lamb also got a new contract as well. Last offseason was filled with a lot of great news for a bunch of wide receivers that got paid accordingly for all the work that they do out there on Sunday. So that was great to see, and there was a lot of new deals and things like that, but one that didn't get a new deal was T. Higgins, and T. Higgins was in the market for a new contract, obviously, after his 4 years had been, run to the end, and he doesn't have a fifth-year option, right, because he was drafted in the second round, so there was more urgency for the Bengals to get it done last offseason, but things really didn't go anywhere at any point, really, during last offseason. There was also talks with Ja'Marr Chase about potentially extending him, right, because he was also eligible to get an extension, but the Bengals decided to put off on that, and instead of doing anything with T. Higgins, like trading him or anything like that, they decided to just franchise tag him, and now we're at the end of that. Right now we're in January, basically February, and things are not looking great from my point of view, right? From my perspective, I think things are heading in the wrong direction for the Bengals, right? And not only that, but now, if last offseason, right, there was that whole situation with Ja'Marr Chase and how it got a little bit awkward, I guess you could say, in training camp when he was kind of holding out because he thought he was going to get a new contract, but at the end he didn't, and he ended up playing, right? He actually didn't hold out into the season, but there was a bit of a cold feeling there between the organization and Ja'Marr Chase, right, to not give him that contract. And then, don't you know it, he goes out and wins the Triple Crown, right? If anything, just pushing that price tag up a little bit more for him this offseason now. But for the Bengals, Ja'Marr Chase can be playing on his fifth-year option this upcoming year, so they still technically have time. And then if they don't even get anything done after that, they could still use the franchise tag on him as well. But he is set to be an unrestricted free agent in 2026 if, again, they don't use that franchise tag. He could technically be an unrestricted free agent next year, right? So that's also, just piling on top of this situation with T. Higgins. And then not to mention, right, you're already, cutting out a big part of your cap space to Joe Burrow, as you should, right? Because he is the Cincinnati Bengals and everything like that. He is what makes them go. So on this topic on handling the wide receivers and where things stand right now, their general manager, Duke Tobin, had the following to say on the entire situation. He said, I can't find it. Here it is. It's going to be hard. We feel like we have the resources to do it, but it all depends on how the negotiation goes and whether they're willing to accept wanting to come back at a number that makes sense for everybody. And pretty direct statement there, right? No dancing around it, right? He kept it pretty honest and just pretty straightforward, right? With, yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, he feels, and he's being pretty optimistic as well, that he can get it done. But, in saying, trying to find a number that makes everybody happy, you could sort of incline that this could be heading for them maybe offering more than likely T. Higgins a little bit less money because, Jamar, they if they would have paid him last offseason, right, this next season that we just had, right, wouldn't have looked so bad if they already gave him that money. But now it's driven up that price tag a little bit more because he just had a historical season. And, instead of maybe just resetting the market by a little bit, now maybe it's another whole number. And I know we're just kind of splitting hairs there a little bit when we're talking about that, but it could make a big difference. And, deciding to wait might not have paid off for the Bengals. And, T. Higgins, in such an inflated wide receiver market with a lot of the attention going on the offense, right? Why, in his mindset, potentially he could be thinking, why would I take less money, right? Like, I decided to play on the franchise tag. I didn't really make a big fuss about it. He played it out like a true professional, and credit to him. So after a season like that, he could be thinking, why should I take less money now if I just played on the franchise tag, right? And I'm sure they're going to get a bunch of offers for him as well in, free agency and things like that, with a lot of teams needing number one guys, guys and teams like the Patriots jump out at you, the Commanders, also the Chargers. All those teams have some of the most money and cap space this upcoming offseason as well, right? The Commanders have the third most cap space available at $78 million. The Patriots have the most cap space at $120 million, and the Chargers aren't too far behind at $63 million as well. So T. Higgins, I'm not worried that he's not going to have any other suitors, right? There's going to be a bunch of people interested in him. So to accommodate him and his contract, there's going to be a bunch of other teams that are willing to pay a little bit more. And that could wind up pretty detrimental for the Bengals because, yes, they still have Burrow, and I'm pretty confident that they're not going to let Jamar walk out the door, obviously. But to try and fit everybody into, to give everybody a piece of the pie according to, their performance and their importance to this team, it gets pretty narrow when you're trying to split it up with a lot of money going to three guys, right? It gets really tough to Joe Burrow, I think $46 million, or have a $46 million cap hit this year from his contract. And then, you talk about Jamar Chase and where he could be at. The wide receiver market right now, I believe, is $35 million per year to Justin Jefferson. So after a historic year like Jamar had, he could be pushing 36 and a half or something like that, right? And the Bengals, because they decided to wait and they're not going to let him walk out the door, could give him a huge piece of the metaphorical pie, I should say. So that's a lot going to Joe, and that's a lot being divided also to Jamar Chase. And then if you're going to give T. Higgins around like $27-30 million, that's almost the entire thing for a team that all season we've been saying that their defense needs a lot of help. This defense is what's holding them back, so you'd naturally think that you would want to add some guys in the offseason, but you can't do that if you're paying all these guys like 2/3 of the pie, or actually like 3/4 of it probably, and you're leaving too little of a space to try and divide it and get guys in. So that's the problem that the Bengals face right now. I think this is definitely trending towards T. Higgins probably departing, because, it's great to have T. Higgins, but when you think about it, as a defense, and you're bringing back Al Golden, who had some good success over there at Notre Dame, I'd imagine that they'd want to prioritize their defense a little bit more. And when you have a quarterback like Joe Burrow, not to diminish anything that T. Higgins has done, because I think he could be a number one, Joe covers up a lot of things, being the kind of quarterback that he is. So having him, Jamar, and probably drafting someone, I think they're at pick 17, I believe, this year. Yeah, they're at 17 this year. So that's a pretty decent area where you can look at guys like, I don't know, like Emeka Buka potentially, or Luther Burden could also be in and around there. There's a couple options for the Bengals to still draft guys, talented guys on the offensive side of the ball. So that's where I think it stands right now. Their general manager, Duke Tobin, is being optimistic, holding out hope, but it probably would get a little bit tough for T. Higgins to do them another solid, right, instead of doing what's best for himself, getting paid accordingly, right? I think that's also very important. So we'll see what ends up happening. We're about a month away from the start of free agency, and it always gets crazy in the first couple days. So we'll hold out for news closer to free agency around T. Higgins and the Bengals. But for right now, we're going to move on to our second topic. We're not going to move too far off of general managers, because we're going to go over to New York and discuss what Giants general manager Joe Schoen had to say about where their head's at in regards to the number 3 overall pick. There's a lot of options, and Joe Schoen is not getting attached too much to any certain prospect, right? He's keeping a pretty open mind on what the Giants will do at number 3. So we'll give him a couple options to consider, and we'll decide what the best option is when we return after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We're back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast on a Friday, the end of January 31st today, already getting closer to the Super Bowl, about 9 days away now, if my math is correct. So we're just getting closer and closer to the big game. But in the meantime, we got to discuss some other things, right? It's almost draft season. Are we already in draft season? I can never really tell when, we start actually labeling it draft season, right? Because the Senior Bowl is already kind of getting underway. The Shrine Bowl also just kind of concluded as well. And there's already, mock drafts coming out and things like that. So I guess we could be in draft season, right? It feels still a little bit too early for me. But in regards to the NFL draft and this segment, right, and the New York Giants, to talk about them here for a little bit, looking at their outlook for this year's upcoming draft. Last year they picked at number 6, and this year didn't go too well, obviously, for a bunch of different reasons, and they dropped 3 more spots. Now they're picking at number 3 this year, and the focus starts turning to that draft and looking at some of the best players in the country coming from college that are going to be right at the fingertips for the Giants to select when we get into April. And General Manager Joe Schoen knows that, obviously, so he's keeping an open mind to all the different options that he is going to have at number 3, right? When you got guys like Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, all these different guys, right? 4 guys there, 3 picks up until the Giants. So they're going to end up with somebody, and that's something that General Manager Joe Schoen is pretty excited about, and still not giving out too many specifics on where his mind is right now, because he said, we're going to be open to anything. We're in a good position sitting at 3 with the players that are available. So by process of elimination, we know we're going to get a good player. Pretty basic stuff there, right? As an opening sort of sentiment at the Senior Bowl during this week, where Joe Schoen gave this statement. And already, you could obviously admit that he's right, because you got tons of guys that you can pick for, and you really can't go wrong with any of them, honestly. I guess, now that I say that, not that Abdul Carter is wrong or anything like that, because he's a tremendous player, but I don't know if that's a major need for the Giants right now, having, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence already there on their defensive line. I don't know if adding Abdul Carter is a must-have for the Giants, but you can't go wrong with Travis Hunter and obviously the 2 quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Someone will be there, even if somebody trades up ahead of the Giants and they stick to what General Manager Joe Schoen is saying. They're still going to have a good range of players to select from. If, say, the Raiders trade up and go to number 2 with the Browns, they take a quarterback. All right, well, if they do take both of them, Cam goes number 1 and Shedeur goes number 2 or something like that, then the Giants can have Travis Hunter, which is not a bad option to be left with at all, or vice versa with any of the other guys. So I think, yes, Joe Schoen is correct. He has a bunch of options to go with, and he'd be all right with any of them, right? Like I said before. But anybody knows around the Giants and what their major issue is the quarterback, right? Hence the question, do the Giants have to draft a quarterback at number 3, right? Joe Schoen can say that they could draft a good player regardless of who it is, right? And he's not wrong. But in this spot, when you have an opportunity this prosperous at number 3, I would say, you got to take advantage of it, because you ideally don't want to be picking top 3 every year, right? So you don't know, ideally, when you'd ever be picking this high, right? Hopefully next year, they're not back here again. So you got to take advantage of it, and your biggest need is sitting right there at your fingertips. So for as open and as, I guess just pretty easygoing with this decision for right now in Joe Schoen, I think you got to lock in on your major issue at hand, your major position of need, because, in this day and age, obviously with the quarterbacks and things in the NFL, you're not really moving anywhere in terms of progression or anything like that when you don't have the guy. And a lot of franchises have struggled each and every year at this point of the year, right? In January and in February, playing up until this point, it's no surprise that all these guys have the top tier guys at quarterback. And, it's very hard to find a guy like that, right? The Giants have that experience of struggling. You look at the Steelers elsewhere, the Browns, again, another team that's picking in the top 3, still trying to figure out their quarterback position. So right now, from what I've seen, a lot of news and content, around social media and just reports you see, have Shedeur Sanders heavily linked to the New York Giants, which is, I think, too obvious to pass up for a couple reasons, and a lot of options to consider, because I believe this is the offseason for the Giants to get it right. And with you already being linked to Shedeur Sanders, and like I said, it brings me to this point where I'm thinking that this is like the main offseason for Joe Schoen, I really should say, and Brian Dable, and the Giants overall, because really after last season and what we saw with Hard Knocks and the whole Saquon situation, right? It's kind of hard to, get over something like that, right? Because Saquon's playing in the Super Bowl in like 9 days. But after a season like that and making a decision like that, we all heard Hard Knocks, how John Mara said he was going to have trouble sleeping. To be back, and I didn't think both of them would be back to start another whole offseason, but they got another chance to kind of make up for that. So that's why I think there's a lot more pressure and a lot more attention on this offseason for both of them. So you at least have to get the first pick right? At number 3, you're going to have a great player, like Joe Shane said, but you got to make sure he makes the difference for you, not just be like a secondary player that's just on the roster, but isn't really a catalyst for changing the course of a game or anything like that, right? So I think Shedeur right now has been the one linked most to them, and I think that would be the best fit, right? Shedeur in New York, the media attention and everything like that. He could have a possibility of going in there, playing pretty good, and not only building the excitement for the fans and things like that, and really taking over that franchise as his if he plays well. But if you look at a bigger picture in the NFC, I've said it before, I'm pretty sure on the show, how I don't really think that there's like a handful of guys that you would deem like unbeatable top-tier quarterbacks in the NFC. All of them are in the AFC, right? Obviously, with Patrick being the main one. But in the NFC, right, I think there's a reason why a rookie quarterback made it to the NFC Championship game and basically carrying his team, right? Because I think he's that special, obviously, to his own merit. But in the NFC, there's not a lot of, just unbeatable final boss kind of quarterbacks, right? To use that analogy. You don't really have that, right? Like Jordan Love's a great quarterback, Matthew Stafford, Hall of Fame quarterback for me, and he's also been considered top 7, top 6 quarterback now. Jalen Hurts obviously also in there. Dak, depending on where you stand on him. Sam Darnold played a great year, but he's probably not top 10 or anything like that. So there's really not a whole bunch of guys to pick from. Baker Mayfield, another one. You don't really have a lot of like the top 5, top 4 guys. So if Shedeur's able to come into New York, play pretty well, and take over that city with all the excitement that he's generated and the hope really from his play, I think it's too obvious of a decision to pass up on. You can be neutral about it right now because we're still very early, but I think the Giants have this opportunity in front of them, and I don't think they could pass it up just because, there's a bunch of guys to choose from, and you don't want to show your hand, obviously, too early. But Shedeur could have a possibility, if he is drafted by New York, to go in there and really take over and have an opportunity to go in there, battle against these top guys, and maybe surprise a lot of people, right? You just never know. Nobody expected the Commanders to be where they are right now, and I know as a roster, probably have a bit more on their roster than the Giants, right? Because the Giants, for as much as we kind of poke fun at them, they have good players like Malik Neighbors, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Tyrone Tracy looked pretty decent as well. They got some guys, right? It's not that far off from the Commanders, right? So I'm not sitting here and like predicting anything if they get Shedeur that they're going to be in the divisional round of the playoffs, but I don't think it's a impossible task to be in and around the playoff picture and be a dangerous team that maybe a lot of people don't want to face if you get hot at the right time, That's where I want this thing to go for the Giants. I think they have an opportunity to do that, but of course, we can get into the discussion of Shedeur versus Cam, or like another option, you could potentially even trade out of number 3 and sign someone like Sam Darnold if they feel like that's their best option, and fill out your roster a little bit more with the picks that you get back for trading down from the number 3 overall pick. That's another scenario where I think it's a little bit too bold for the Giants to do something like that, but it is something out there that you could consider because you still need to improve the offensive line, get some more receivers. I'd like to see some more linebackers, off-ball linebackers there for the Giants as well. So they still need a lot of pieces to add to this whole thing, but they do got the options, right? And I guess that brings us back to what Joe Schoen was saying, right? On the idea of, yes, there's a lot of players, yes, they're in a good spot, and they're open to a lot of different things, right? And it also just falls back onto their evaluation, I guess you could say, on how much they actually like some of these rookie quarterbacks, or do they take a chance on Sam Darnold? And it is a chance, it is a risk, because he just had his best season. So is that enough to give him, I don't know, like $30-40 million for like 3 years or something like that? Probably something around that. Is that something that you're willing to take a risk on? Especially, like I mentioned before, Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, in a situation where, not that we're hoping for it or anything like that, but I think that, their jobs are, their seats are starting to get a little bit hot, right? So that's also something that alters some decisions, right? When you know that you're kind of under a microscope now of potentially losing your job if things don't go well, right? So there's a lot of pressure, obviously. Being in New York brings that naturally, but also after a few years of regression and disappointment, this has to be the year where we see at least a step forward, not 2 steps back if you're the Giants. So a lot riding on this decision, and we're still very early into it, but I think, yes, in a way the Giants have to draft. They need to get a quarterback on their team, right? They need to switch it up there, whether it be Sam, Shador, or Cam. I think it has to be one of those 3 as a final answer, to the question on your screen. So that's only one of the many stories that we're probably going to talk about in this draft process. But for right now, we're going to move over to the NFL a little bit more, talking about the Dallas Cowboys and more on their head coaching hire. This time, Dak Prescott had something to say about Brian Schottenheimer, who he has a very good relationship with, and he gave him a little boost of confidence as well. We're going to go into what he said and also talking bigger picture with the Cowboys, just having a look around, the NFC and seeing how things stand with the Cowboys and where they rank in the hierarchy of the NFC as a whole, but also their division. So we'll be right back with that. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back into the show now for our next segment. If you are just joining us now, we previously talked about the Giants and some ideas of what they're going to do with that number 3 overall pick, and also talking about the Bengals situation with both of their receivers, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But for right now, we're on to the Dallas Cowboys. Once again, I thought it was interesting when this past week when, Brian Schottenheimer got introduced as a new head coach and things like that. I actually didn't know that Dak Prescott attended the press conference, and I wasn't sure how Dak would feel about, the hiring of Brian Schottenheimer. That was a topic that kind of, went through my mind a little bit, because I don't know, I felt like Dak maybe could have been in a position where he wanted somebody else to come in. I don't know, it could have been a possibility where he, probably didn't want Mike McCarthy to go, but if he was to go, I don't know if Dak was feeling more so of the side of going out and getting a big name guy, or just getting somebody outside the organization maybe to change things up. I didn't know if that was where Dak stood or anything like that, and I also didn't know that he attended the press conference. But knowing that now, I think that says everything that we needed to know about how Dak feels that Brian Schottenheimer is his new head coach rather than bringing in someone else. So afterwards, after the press conference, Dak Prescott spoke with the team's official website about Brian Schottenheimer and just his thoughts on the hiring and things like that after, spending some time, together for the last couple years since 2022. Brian Schottenheimer came in as the coaching analyst, and he's been the offensive coordinator for the last 2 seasons. So on that, Dak Prescott actually had to say that I wanted to show him, hey, I'm going to be here with you and for you, not only what he signs for 4 years, I got 4 years left in my contract. So he's tied directly to my future. So let's go be the best that we can in these 4 years, was what Dak Prescott briefly said there after Brian Schottenheimer's press conference. And this time around, not only have they spent time together, the last couple years as Brian Schottenheimer was the offensive coordinator, but this time now he will be calling plays because Mike McCarthy was still doing that over the last 2 years. So Schottenheimer was involved in the offense, but it wasn't really, I guess you could say, his vision of how the offense was supposed to be or how he maybe would have changed things if he was calling plays. So I just wonder now, on this whole situation still with the Cowboys and looking ahead to what they could be, right? It's all speculation and people want to have an idea because there's been so much confusion and just still a level of shock with Brian Schottenheimer being the new head coach because he has no head coaching experience and people are just still puzzled by the entire thing. So I wonder how much continuity there actually will be with his offense, like his actual offense now calling the plays against, Mike McCarthy, who was calling his offense, he was calling the plays and everything like that. The offense, you would think, looked the most like he wanted it to the last 2 years. So with that, Dak said that he was also a big factor when he talked to Jerry about the coaching change and potentially wanting that continuity as a big factor to who should be their next head coach. And I think that's kind of ironic in a sense because we need to see them actually break away from what they've been doing, right? Not continually showing us what they've been showing us for the last, at least 2 decades or something like that, right? So I think that was kind of ironic that he went to Jerry and they talked about continuity of all things, right? You'd think they'd want to have a change, right, in the recent patterns, but to each their own, I guess, in that sense. But in regards to the offensive portion of this, I wonder how much of it is actually going to change because that was one of my worries, right, when it came down to it. I want to see change with this team. I don't want to see the same Cowboys team that has a couple wins in a row, a couple big plays during the season, right? They put up pretty impressive numbers probably, and they have probably not a home field advantage game because it'll probably be the Commanders or the Eagles, but they'll be a wild card team potentially, and then that they're going to go home in the first round, right? I don't want to see that movie again, right? I'm tired of seeing that. So I'm wondering how much of this offense would change with Brian Schottenheimer to give me a little bit of hope potentially with him, taking the reins now. If it is pretty different and we do see some things that we haven't seen before with this offense, then I'll be a little bit more optimistic about this hire. But with Dak saying he wanted continuity and that seems to be the narrative with this hire already with Brian Schottenheimer, I worry that it is the same old offense out there again. And I know they could add people. And I know they're probably going to add hopefully a wide receiver, or there's been a lot of talks linking them with Ashton Genty in the draft, which is probably a realistic thing that's going to happen. So at least we'll get that as a sort of injection of excitement for this team, and getting them to run the ball again seems to be something that Brian Schottenheimer wants to do as one of the main goals with this offense, and who better than Ashton Genty, right, from last year. So if they're able to do that, it'll add some more excitement. But overall, I feel like with this team, it has wild card written all over them as their ceiling for right now, the way I see it. And if they do reach that, and more likely than not move on after the first round of the playoffs, I think we should start shifting our focus a little bit and start changing this standard, and I guess the expectation really for what we go into this season and seasons to come thinking about the Dallas Cowboys, right? Is it time to stop thinking about them as this top team in the NFL, right? When you think of the Cowboys, immediately you think of like one of the most recognizable franchises. But I think the standard should, and honestly probably has changed already a little bit with this team, right? After not being to an NFC Championship game for almost like 30 years or something like that, I think it's time to start bringing them down a couple of pegs, right? They're not this like Vikings sort of Buccaneers type of team, right? I don't think they're not even at that level as of right now. To me, they're more like a Seattle. They're more like an Arizona Cardinals team. I think they're closer to those teams rather than being closer to like the Lions or the Eagles or like the Rams or anything like that. I feel like we got to start changing our expectations now, because really it's not only been this move, but it's been a collection of transactions and actions, or lack thereof actions, that have really led me to this position, right? I feel like I keep coming on here disappointed that the Cowboys are doing the same old thing. And so I think I've gotten to a point that I'm on here talking about how we should start changing the standard of it a little bit, right? Like, this isn't a Cowboys team that is going to get to the playoffs and it's going to be a huge, like, devastating thing when they lose in the playoffs, right? I think that happens when good teams get there and you expect them to win and they end up losing, right? So I think with the standard now with the Cowboys should be like they'd be having a decent season if they made the playoffs, which sounds crazy, right? But I think it's gotten that bad, in all honesty. And I don't really see them getting that much better, right? They could add a piece here or there, but when you're competing with just in your own division, right, the Commanders and the Eagles, right, the Eagles are not going anywhere. All their best players are locked in, I think, to at least like 2028 or something like that. So they're not moving. The Commanders are their worst version this year. They're only going to continue to get better because Jaden's on that rookie contract. And when you have a phenomenal quarterback like Jaden, this is the time to take advantage of it, right? When you get him on a cheaper deal. So they're going to go out there and probably improve this team a whole lot with the third most cap space in the NFL. So just even in your own division, right, you look at the outlook and you're probably going to be a wild card team. And then in the wild card, I mean, are they going to even make it past, or I should say over the Packers, the Vikings, or even a team like the Commanders, right? It seems like even that's a tall task to do. So we should start kind of taming our expectations a little bit. And it sounds, again, crazy to say that when you're referring to the Cowboys, but I think we're kind of as down bad as we can be with this team, right? And I don't really see a light at the end of the tunnel quite yet with this team. And I wonder with Brian Schottenheimer here to kind of tie a bow around everything, talking about being at one of the lowest points with this Cowboys team, I do wonder if getting any worse, like if they have another bad season this year, I wonder if that would even push Jerry Jones to kind of breaking one of his habits of just waiting till his head coach's contract expires for them to make a move, right? Because with Jason Garrett, they wrote out that contract. With Mike McCarthy, they wrote out that contract. So I wonder if the Cowboys have another bad season, if Jerry Jones would be willing to kind of break one of his habits and move on from Brian Schottenheimer potentially and go out and get another head coach. I think that could be a possibility if it was any other franchise, but with Jerry, I'm just not quite sure. I wonder if that level of disappointment would even led him to make a change like that. That's something else I was thinking of. But, it just feels like we'll just have to wait, 4 years or something like that for them to hit another complete reset when Dak's out of a contract or when Brian Schottenheimer is also out of a contract. If they don't change their ways, it's just going to lead us to another big reset, I feel like. So, yeah, Dak Prescott, vote of confidence. Dak always says the right things, but I don't know how resonating that message is at this point in this portion of his career with these Cowboys fans. I don't even know if they're buying that sort of optimism with Schottenheimer now as their head coach, but I guess we'll see, right? We'll see when the season starts in a long, long time from now. But for this show, we got a couple more things to talk about. One of them is looking and focusing on the offseason a little bit more, starting to look at each team in the NFL and just going through a couple, 2 or 3 positions where I think that they need to upgrade at for 2025. And in the next segment, we're going to have our first rendition of this series focusing on the Green Bay Packers. So when we return, we're going to look at ways the Packers can improve in 2025.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Joining us back now on the action on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, we will start talking about something that we're going to carry on probably through the majority of the offseason. We're going to go through each team in the NFL right now that a lot of the focus has shifted to the offseason and just looking at spots where I think each team can improve on, right? What position or multiple positions that they could target maybe in the draft or free agency, and just talking about their options basically. We're going to go through each team, probably one episode, and just go through there for the offseason, or at least the beginning portion of it. So with the Packers, unfortunately, there was no Cinderella run this time around again to build off of last year's impressive run. Despite the loss against the Eagles, I think it was still pretty close. Maybe, I forget the exact score, but it felt pretty close at one point in that third quarter where Josh Jacobs scored that touchdown. And I'm thinking like man, look at the Packers. They could maybe do something here, right? But it was never like a full belief, right? Because it felt like that was their best last punch. And for all my hope, it wasn't entirely convincing because, after that, the Eagles really took control and they ended up winning that game, obviously. And I thought overall for the Packers this season that Josh Jacobs proved to be a great addition, right? When you're talking about the changes that they made ahead of this past season, Josh Jacobs proved to be one of the best additions overall in the NFL. Drafting Ajarian Cooper was another steal. I believe in the second round they got him, and he turned out to be an all-world player for them. And also, talking about great additions, Xavier McKinney, right, coming over from the Giants, signing him after they let go of Darnell Savage. A major improvement there. He was close to the league lead in interceptions with Kirby Joseph, so that was awesome too, right? It was an amazing addition to this defense. And now that we're through the season with the Packers and that they've been done for a while, I think there's 2 positions that they need to focus on to really, take that next step, right? I think they're still stuck in being this young team that sort of surprises, the other experienced teams, right? They tried to go through that again this year, but it just didn't work out, right? A lot more teams knew what they were going to expect with this Packers team, so they were ready for it, right? They weren't really catching anybody off guard, so Now, to kind of get past that, I feel like one of the positions they need to improve on is a better pass rush, just overall. Not really like an outside guy or an inside guy, just overall improve this pass rush, because they had one of the lowest blitz rates all season for this team. And it's not like they just didn't need to blitz, right? I felt like they needed to blitz more because they weren't really getting home anyway, just not blitzing. So they only recorded 2 sacks in the playoffs this year, and their regular season sack leader, Rashawn Gary, only had 7.5 sacks during the regular season. So it's just not enough, I think, to really make an impact. And you got guys like Luke Van Ness, who just finished his second year, and he's been okay, but I feel like they need a true like game-wrecking kind of player that draws double teams, that beats double teams, and, changes the course of a game, whether it be through a big sack, a strip sack, or anything like that. They need someone like that still. And I like Rashawn Gary. And like I said, Luke Van Ness is an okay player with a lot of potential still. But for the main reason, I just think that they need someone to alter the game, and for the offensive line to really essentially have a healthy fear for, right? When they know they're playing the Packers, they need to know that they need to be on their game when they're playing an elite pass rusher, and they haven't had that this past year. So they really lived off of turnovers, right? They weren't really stopping too many, people per se, on 3 and outs and things like that. I think they relied a lot on the turnovers by McKinney, and Keyshawn Nixon also had a big impact in that. But other than that, it wasn't like a dominant defense that just made multiple stops. So in terms of the pass rush, to kind of help out the entire defense, they could look at free agency and look at guys like Josh Sweat, Khalil Mack, if that's of any interest for them. I know he's a little bit older, obviously. Maybe you take a swing at a guy like Hassan Reddick, right? He didn't have a great year whatsoever in the AFC with the Jets, right? For on-the-field reasons and off-the-field reasons. So maybe if he comes back to the NFC, he'd have a little bit more success. You could probably get him a little bit cheaper now, potentially, because of the whole circus it was with the contract and the Jets and things like that. So those are a couple options in free agency that they could look at. Or you could draft a guy around pick number 23 if they so choose to do that. It might be a little bit too late for guys like Shamar Stewart or Michael Williams from Georgia, right? Shamar Stewart from Texas. It might be a little bit too late for them with the Falcons and like the Bengals in and around that area where some of these guys have been projected to go. But in the later rounds, I mean, you could still get a guy like Mike Green from Marshall. He's been pretty impressive at the Senior Bowl. James Pierce from Tennessee could be another intriguing option that could fall to you at number 23. So I think hopefully they can address that position of need with one of those guys, right? I'm sure there's a bunch of other options that they could do, maybe like a trade or something like that for someone. But improving this pass rush is definitely one of the main things. And the other one, for me, is still on the defensive side of the ball, and that's looking at their cornerbacks specifically. You could say secondary, but I think corner is the main one, because one of their corners, Eric Stokes, is going to be a free agent this offseason, and there's a lot of I'm getting a lot of cryptic vibes from Jair Alexander and his relationship with the Packers, because I'm almost certain I saw a pretty cryptic message or a tweet or just something on social media from Jair about maybe moving on this offseason or something like that, or this potentially being his last season with the Packers. So you have that, but also from the Packers side, there is some concerns about the injuries from Jair, for how much money they're paying him and things like that, for him to still be dealing with a lot of injuries, and he's injured for a good portion of the season. It always feels like that maybe he could be a trade or release candidate at some point this offseason. I've seen a couple reports around that as well. So that secondary could be taking some major hits if both or just Jair Alexander decides to leave. So with that, you could look at guys outside of, Keyshawn Nixon, who I think is a pretty solid player. He said he's done on kickoff, so he's going to focus more on the defensive side of the ball, which I think he's good. I think he's solid. I think he's a good number 2. Jair was definitely the number 1, so if you end up losing a guy like that, you're going to need to add someone, obviously, and they have, I believe, better options in this realm in free agency with guys like DJ Reed over from the Jets. He's a free agent. Or you stay close in the NFC and get a guy like Trevarius Ward. He's also set to be a free agent, and it could be a situation where he's closer to leaving than re-signing. I'm pretty sure I saw a report around that for personal reasons, right? I don't think I should talk about it on here, but if you guys are more interested, you could read more about why that is, but it is just personal reasons that I saw he could be inching towards leaving San Francisco. So if they could get a guy like Trevarius Ward, right, a number 1 corner, would help out a lot if they are to lose Jair Alexander. Or again, in the draft, there's a lot of enticing prospects that they could get, and I certainly have a very high grade, I guess you could say, on Benjamin Morrison, the corner from Notre Dame. He did deal with a hip injury towards the end of this season, but I think a lot of people have high praise for him, and based on what they have seen so far, and that injury potentially hurting his stock a little bit, he could be there around number 23, and the Packers could take a jump on him and draft him, right? I think he could be a very solid player for them as well. So they got a bunch of options there, but I think those 2 positions for me are definitely of the utmost importance for the Green Bay Packers. And I saw some people say that maybe the wide receiver position is something that they have to look over, and maybe, I mean, I guess I could see it because it feels like they have a lot of, no disrespect, like a lot of B+, A- kind of players, and I don't know if they need like a bona fide number 1 receiver, because I think this year some of the struggles on offense were on Jordan Love, right? He didn't take that massive step that everybody anticipated, so to make a change at wide receiver already, I think would kind of be premature. So I would stick with the group, but if you had to make a move, maybe like a guy like Amari Cooper or something like that in free agency that could come on a cheaper deal, could be something of interest for the Packers. But for me personally, I think just writing it out one more year with Jordan Love and hopefully he takes that next step would be something that I would do. But definitely focusing on the defensive side of the ball first and foremost for me and the Packers. So hopefully, they make those moves. And for us on this show, we got one more segment to get to. Another power ranking segment, just ranking the top 10 most important players for the Super Bowl this year. Super Bowl 59, going from 10 to number 1 on who I believe is the most important players in the Super Bowl this year, right? We're going to rank them, and I'm going to tell you why I have them ranked this way when we return after this break. Thank you for joining me back here on the last segment of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. Just like I did yesterday a little bit, just talking about the Super Bowl, just trying to incorporate it here a little bit with some of these segments because we are still a good ways away from it, right? I don't want to preview anything just yet, but I thought I'd talk about the rankings on, there's a lot of great players in this Super Bowl. There's a lot of star talent everywhere you look on both of these teams, right? From the quarterbacks, from the just skill position players and things like that. So with there being so many, I thought I'd just rank the top 10 most important players I feel like are going to make the biggest impact on the Super Bowl, in 9 days from now. So as you can see a couple of them on your screen, but we do got 10 to get through. So starting at number 10, I think the 10th most important player in the Super Bowl this year is going to be Xavier Worthy. I think it's Xavier Worthy. I believe it's Xavier Worthy because he's grown a lot this year. And I think from what we saw from him at the beginning of the year, a lot of what was being said was a gadget guy, quick, but what else can he actually do, right? Was a lot of the narrative around him, and I think he's really become and matured into a pretty, complete wide receiver. Not to say that he's not going to get tremendously better, right, after his first year, but I feel like he's grown a lot in this offense. It feels like Pat trusts him a lot to target him a lot during the game and feel comfortable in a bunch of different things, right? Still doing the jet sweeps and maybe some handoffs, some tosses to him and things like that, but making routine plays, moving the chains, being a reliable target, catching, being trustworthy when the pass comes your way. Things like that, I think, I've seen grown in the relationship between Xavier Worthy and Pat. And in the Super Bowl specifically, I don't need him to have like 8 receptions or anything like that, right? But I do need, like this Chiefs team has shown all year, I just need him to fill his role, make 1 or 2 plays that's required of him, and, the rest is going to go like it usually goes with the Chiefs. I don't need the entire game from him. I just need 2 to 3 plays where he does make a deep catch or he does take a sweep for 15, 20 yards or something like that. That's all I really need from him, and I think that speed definitely is a threat anytime he's out there. So I had him in at number 10. And then just moving on a little bit to number 9, I had A.J. Brown. I had A.J. Brown here similar to Xavier Worthy because obviously Philadelphia is a run-heavy team, and they don't, again, like Worthy, they don't need A.J. Brown to have 9 receptions for 100 yards to win this game, but just make the plays when it counts, right? When Jalen has to throw on a 3rd and 7, on a 4th and 4 or something like that, and a lot of people know that it's probably going to you, make the play when you need it to, right? Just a solid 4 receptions, 5 receptions for like 60 yards, 50 yards is really all you need from AJ because, again, this is a run-heavy team. That's who they are. I don't need the Eagles to be doing something that's not been their identity during the biggest game of the year, right? If this is you, show it, try and win that way, and rely on A.J. Brown when the moment comes. Not to say that he's a bum or anything like that, but that's what this team has been, and he could win one-on-one matchups, right? A lot of people would take that matchup over any corner. So making the plays when you need it, being a form of impactful any way that you can, has really become the theme of this Super Bowl. So I think that's really what I'm looking for A.J. Brown, right, as the number 1 target or the number 1 wide receiver for the Eagles. Then at number 8, pretty similar to the first 2, Trent McDuffie. Trent McDuffie is going to be very important in regards to who I had at number 9, A.J. Brown, right? Taking whoever he's on during the game, right? Because I don't think they're just going to limit him to A.J. Brown. He's probably going to be on him a lot, but, putting him on Devontae Smith or any other receivers, right? I'm sure the Eagles will move him around. But McDuffie, whoever he does draw the matchup of, try and take them out of the game as much as possible. At least force tight window throws. Because Jalen, I anticipate, isn't going to throw that much. So with them being predominantly a run-heavy team, all these throws become a little bit more important, right? Because you got to have them because you're not going to throw that much. So the value of them increases, right, when the quantity decreases of them. So for Trent, I'm sure he's going to be in one-on-one situations a lot. So making sure that you make it extremely hard for Jalen to even throw your way. Heck, maybe don't even have him look your way if that's the case. And if you draw the matchup of A.J. Brown and you can have Jalen go away from your matchup pretty quickly, that's going to be a huge win for the Chiefs if they're able to shut down one of these receivers and cut down the options a little bit more for Jalen Hurts. So he's going to be super important for that defense in at number 8. Then at number 7, staying on the defensive side of the ball, I got Zach Bond. Zach Bond up there for one of the best free agent acquisitions this offseason, and he really has to watch everything on that defense, right? There's a lot of responsibilities that comes with his position. He's got to watch everything across the middle of the field. He has to set up the defense, getting the call and deploying everybody where they should be. Changing the play potentially or changing the coverage based on what he hears from Patrick. Having that one-on-one quarterback to linebacker sort of chess match is going to be fascinating to watch. Maybe, being a spy on Patrick, also in some situations covering Travis Kelce. There's a lot of things that he's going to have to do, and I feel like a lot of people won't really notice it too much. So I wanted to highlight Zach Bond a little bit because he's truly had one of the best seasons that I don't think a lot of people are talking about too much. So he's going to do a lot of different things and probably going to have to do them at a high level to win this game against the Chiefs. So I had him in a little bit higher at number 7. Then at number 6, I mentioned him a little bit, Travis Kelce. I feel like this could be a matchup where they could exploit the Eagles a little bit because you look last week, Zach Ertz had 11 receptions for 104 yards. Tyler Higbee the week before had 7 receptions for 54 yards and a touchdown. Not to diminish those other guys, but Travis is definitely expected to do or be considered a better tight end than both of those guys. So having that matchup, seeing how the Commanders kind of exploited that matchup a little bit, this could be perfectly set up for Travis to have one of those classic playoff performances alongside Patrick. So he didn't really have a big impact against the Bills. So I think after a game like that, you go into the Super Bowl, you have a huge impact. I think he's in line for one of those classic games because for as good as the Eagles are at covering, right, as good as they are at pass defense, I think that the middle of the field is somewhere where teams could take advantage of because Quinyon and Darius and then the safeties up on over them do a very good job of limiting things down the sidelines and to the boundaries. So I think the middle of the field, especially with not having Nakobe Dean in there anymore, could be huge for them. So I like that for the Chiefs. Then at number 5, I have the guy on your screen, Jalen Carter. He's got to get to Patrick some way, somehow. However many times he could do it, the more the merrier. He's got to get to Patrick, and he's got to alter his picture as much as possible. You got to keep him contained first and foremost, right? You can't have him running all over the place and distorting your defensive game plan. But force the offensive line to bring as many people over to try and block you. It helps everywhere else. It helps all the other matchups along your defensive line. The more attention that's on you, the more you're impacting the game, the more it helps you as a collective. So he's gotta win his matchup, and it's going to be a good one against Trey Smith, one of the best guards in the NFL. Also, Creed Humphrey, I'm sure, is going to be in there as well. So you got to win that matchup, right? There's got to be a lot of individual matchup victories for whoever's going to win this Super Bowl. So I think Jalen has a big task of pushing the pocket, making Patrick uncomfortable, and just getting him to move around, not just sit there and pick your defense apart. And with that being said, I could say the same exact thing for who I have at number 4, Chris Jones. Chris Jones not only has to get to Jalen Hurts, but also you got to stop the run. You got to stop the run with Saquon. He's going to be right in the middle of it every single play. So the difficult part about this is it's not just beating your guy and trying to get to Saquon, right? You got to be very disciplined, very gap-oriented, and he's a very good player, right? Obviously, but him sticking to his responsibilities just as much as the entire defensive line is going to be the name of the game. And as much as he can do that and stop the run, if he could make one play or two, I don't need him to sack Jalen 2 or 3 times, but if he can make one play, a tackle for a loss, maybe one sack that knocks him out of field goal range, or just one play that changes the course of how this game is going, like he did last year when he almost got to Brock Purdy on one of the throws in the red zone that had them settle for 3 points. Something like that, right? The main thing is going to be for him to try and stop Saquon, and then if he can make one other play on top of that, that's all I really need. So I have him in at number 4, and then at number 3, going on to number 1, I'm sure you guys can guess them. At number 3, I have Patrick Mahomes as advertised, right? There's not too much to say of what I need to see from Patrick, right? But obviously, I think some things like getting the ball out quickly, not letting those guys get to you, learning from the Buccaneers Super Bowl, right, on how, running for your life, obviously taking those sacks really destroy the game. So getting the ball out quickly, using your legs as much as possible is going to be huge for them. Again, a lot like he did in the Super Bowl last year. And the biggest thing is no turnovers, right? The Eagles have made a living off of picking off Jordan Love 3 times. Against the Rams, 2 forced fumbles in critical moments. Against the Commanders, 4 other turnovers as well. The Chiefs aren't really known for being so loose with the ball like that. So keeping to that mantra and not turning the ball over is really a lot on Patrick. So he's in at number 3. And then the top 2 are Eagles players. At number 2, I got Jalen Hurts, right? Because he's going to have to make some big-time throws in this game. It's not as simple as just running the ball. It's not going to be the Commanders game where they're going to run it in 7 times, right? He made some good throws in that game. You're going to need to do a lot more of that in this Super Bowl against the Chiefs, who I believe that Steve Spagnuolo and that defense overall is going to have to make them play left-handed, and I think they're just going to live with the results of that. So Jalen is going to be in the spotlight a lot, making throws, converting third downs, and things like that. So that's a huge portion of it, because I believe Saquon in this running game is going to only get them to this point and is going to keep it competitive. But to make the difference, to make the one play, unlike the Bills did in the AFC Championship, you're going to need to do something that's, above what you've done all season. And I think Jalen, if he can make some fantastic throws, be accurate with it, again, no turnovers, that could be the difference, right? Unlike 2 Super Bowls ago, right? When Jalen had that costly fumble, it gets returned for a touchdown, and in a close game, something like that could end up being the difference. So kind of tugging the line from not showing hesitation, right? Double clutching and things like that, but also just not being reckless with it. It's easier said than done, but I think Jalen has a lot of responsibility that way. And then at number 1, it's Saquon. Obviously, he's the most important player in this game, because without him having any sort of impact in this game, the Eagles really have no chance, I think. Jalen, I trust him to make a good amount of throws, maybe more than people expect, but if Saquon's really, held to like 70 yards or something like that, I don't really see a way that the Eagles win, because if that happens, then the Chiefs have taken away your biggest asset, and I don't see the Eagles overcoming that. I don't see any team overcoming that in any Super Bowl. So Saquon has to be the be-all, end-all for this team. He has been all season, and it'll be interesting to see these 2 records, kind of, right? Because the Chiefs have gone 18 straight playoff games without allowing a 100-yard rusher to the opposing team, and Saquon has only gotten over 118 yards each and every game in the playoffs. So something's going to have to give, and I think Saquon holds the key to a lot in the Super Bowl, right? It's everything with him or nothing without him, basically, for the Eagles, right? And the Chiefs obviously know that, and they're going to try and stop him to the best of their abilities. And that's why I have him as the most important player in the Super Bowl. So that brings us to the end of today's show. On the next week's shows, we're going to go more in depth on the Super Bowl, obviously with the game being next Sunday. So for right now, I want to thank you guys all for joining me on today's show. And please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the Chip Shot Football Podcast over on their YouTube channels, especially the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, where you can see more content around this show covering the NFL, more breaking news, discussions, draft news, off-season, transactions and things like that, all being covered on here with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So again, I hope you guys have a great weekend. That's the end of today's show, and I'll see you guys all back here again next week on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit.